Thank you for joining us on Challenger's History. I'm here with my good friend Mordechai Yemini, who is about to publish his book, Foundations on Maimonidean Approach to Torah and Foundations of Judaism. We're not going to focus on that. Today is all about remembering the legacy of the recently passed Hakham Yosef or Jose Faur, Zechrono Livracha. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, Mordechai, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me who, a lot of people don't know who Rabbi Faur was. Tell me succinctly who this man was, what he stood for, why do you think he left such an important legacy? What was it?
So Hacham Jose Faur is one of those people whose true legacy won't be understood for many years after his passing, because he's one of those visionaries who's so much ahead of his time that most people who hear him speak or read his books may not fully appreciate yet what he had to impart. Okay. That being said, he had an enormous effect on the Sephardic Jewish community in Brooklyn, and the Syrian community specifically. And the effect that he had on that community is, it's often overlooked by historians, by community members, sometimes purposely, but most of the time just by omission, mistakes. So the history of Hakham Faur, he was raised in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And in Argentina, he studied under some of the Chachamim that came straight from Syria to Argentina. So his tradition was the pure Halabi tradition of Torah scholarship, and the way he called it, religious humanism. It wasn't filtered through yeshivot, the Ashkenazi yeshivot. It wasn't filtered through modern institutions. He was taught directly by Chachamim who came off the boat directly to Buenos Aires, and at a time when Limud Torah was not very popular. Most of the Jews in Argentina at the time were not observant, and Chacham Eliyahu Suli, Jamil Harari, Aaron Cohen, these Chachamim and Eliyahu Frewe, today we look at their scholarship, they're considered great Sephardic Chachamim, but at the time, Hakham Faur managed to really get a lot of alone time with them and a lot of study time with them, simply because there wasn't that much Limud Torah going on, okay? And in his late teens, and he was 16 or 17 years old, in the 50s, he was accepted into Bais Medrash Gavoa of Lakewood, under of Aaron Kotler. And he went there to try to expand his Talmudic study. And Hakham Faur already then, I know him personally, he told me that he was very lucky that the dorm room that he was in belonged to an old maskil. Okay? And it was a house that used to belong to an old maskil, and the house was full of Jewish literature in Hebrew and German and in many other languages. And Chacham at that time was a student of Rav Kotler. They considered him an Ilui. He was friendly with a lot of people that today are considered famous in the Jewish world that people don't know about. He had personal relationships with people from Reb Shlomo Carlebach to Reb Yoel Teitelbaum from Satmar. These people that he knew on a personal level, okay? And he, at the time, he kind of, after spending a few months trying to get into the yeshiva system of Talmudic study and being accepted as one of them, he came to the conclusion that his Syrian tradition, Sephardic tradition of Talmudic scholarship, is more structured, more organized, and he left the yeshiva world and kind of went back to seek out more of these Shayarei Knesset Gdola from Chalab. Okay? Mm-hmm. So he became a student of Chacham Atlub Abadi as well, who ultimately ordained him. Now, I don't know how much to get into the details of his life, but what's important to stress is that Chacham Faur is not a modern academic, even though he has modern academic works, and modern academics definitely have what to learn from him. He was a traditional Jew. That's how he lived. That was his mannerisms. He was a Chacham from the old school. He had a chavruta with Saul Lieberman. He considered him as chavruta. Studying Talmud with Chacham Faur, you would hear sometimes he'd mention things he discussed with Saul Lieberman. And at the time, I think he was a Talmud professor or halacha professor, I don't remember exactly, in the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the flagship rabbinic school of the conservative movement. And that was a point of contention in the Orthodox world. Chacham Faur's position was, I'm Sephardic, we don't know about conservative Orthodox reform, we're not involved in this Ashkenaz denominational thought. Bet Midrash LeRabbanim or Jewish Theological Seminary is a good place to study Torah, and I'm not involved in the politics. Plus, this is my profession. This is what I do. And he taught there at the same time being a rabbi in the Syrian community. And it's important to note also that when he came in the 70s to Brooklyn, the Syrians in Brooklyn were not, I don't want to spit into the well that I drank from, but the Syrians in Brooklyn at the time were probably something like 90% Machalei Shabbat. If you went to a Syrian shul, people would come to Bet Knesset for early minyan and then go to work. Okay? The children went to public school. 60s and 70s. Okay. All right? Chacham Faur was one of the first people to gather up the children and make like a kitab and study with them and teach them and kind of bring them back to religion. He was actually the first Kiruv guy in the Syrian community. Ad kedei kach that many of the rabbis that later turned on him and became his opponents because of his falling out with the Haredi establishment were his original students who he used to go to the parks, collect them from playing basketball or handball with the non-Jews, bring them to the Bet Midrash and teach them Torah. And they'll admit, some of them in private admitted to me that yes, Chacham Faur was the one who introduced me to Limud Torah, you know? So that's the effect he had on the Syrian community. It can't be overstated that the later resurgence of Torah, and like, it was a time in the Syrian community where you didn't have Sephardic rabbis really, right? There was a time when they were hiring Ashkenaz rabbis. Chacham Faur was really responsible for bringing Jewish scholarship back into that community and kind of being mekarev those youth, you know? Anyway. Right. The story sounds nice, but it didn't end well because Chacham Faur was very traditional Sephardic, and he was very close to Harambam, very Maimonidean in many ways, and he wrote articles promoting the Maimonidean tradition, the way he saw it as, you know, authentic Sephardic Gaonic tradition. He found himself at loggerheads both with the religious establishment by Ashkenazim as well as by the Sephardic religious establishment, which was kind of getting its own bearing, getting its own their own power base, and so on. Chacham Faur's articles were considered very inflammatory. I don't know if you've read his like famous anti-Maimonidean demons or his work. They were considered very inflammatory. It started even though he was a rabbi and he was teaching, and they gave him his own Bet Knesset. They ended up putting him in cherem. Yated Ne'eman came out with the complete war. It was like an all-out war against him. They had Chacham Ovadia got involved. Rav Shach wrote against him. One of the Teshuvot in Yabia Omer, if I remember correctly, is obliquely referring to Chacham Faur, that he shouldn't be a rabbi in Sharei Tzion. But on the other hand, Rav Meshash from Jerusalem and Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu, who was the chief rabbi, defended Chacham Faur, and a bedin was set up for this. There was a lot of controversy. What ended up happening was that Chacham just left. He went to Eretz Israel. He headed the Talmud department for a while in Bar Ilan, and then in teaching law in Netanya University, and that's where he stayed until his ultimate passing last week and he left us. So that's a little bit of background on who Chacham Faur was. Now,
I mean, a remarkable, unusual man in so many ways. Just his life story. I mean, here's someone born to Damascene parents who came from Damascus and emigrated to Buenos Aires. He was born there, so he's fluent in Spanish and Arabic from home, and of course Hebrew, and a bunch of other languages, English picked up. And he goes. I don't know if you mentioned this,
French.
studied. Yeah, so many languages, a polymath in many ways. And he goes and studies, and he's the first Orthodox, the first observant Jew to have matriculated out of a Spanish university. I believe he studied.
No, he claims to be the first Jew since the expulsion to matriculate.
Well,
not the first Orthodox. The first Jew.
Yeah, I don't want to use the term Orthodox. Right, go ahead.
No, the first Jew in general, because since the expulsion, no Jew has been into Barcelona University.
No open Jews. I mean, you know as well as I do that many Jews stayed behind. And
conversos, yeah.
And so forth. I mean, there were Jews in Spain that trickled in, but I don't know. Yeah, okay. Just this whole life story is just so unusual and fascinating. Where he ended up, the people he met, and just the amount of energy that went into his work, and the amount of writing that he produced, and he created a family. He wasn't a loner in that sense.
Children, banim ubnei banim, oskim b'torah v'mitzvot.
It's beautiful. I was watching the Aliyat yesterday on WhatsApp, and I'm sorry, Zoom, and it's just beautiful to see that he created exactly like what you say, banim ubnei banim, and they're all so committed.
Committed and continuing the tradition.
And my question is, I don't want to focus on negative because I don't like to focus on negative, but here's a person who in some way created a lot of controversy in his time, to the point where even today there are many, I would say, people who don't want to mention his name or don't have nice things to say about him. I mean, obviously, again, I don't want to focus on that, but why do you think someone like him, who's so talented and so learned, and everybody has to admit, even his detractors, why do he arouse so much of the anti-ness?
It's hard for me to answer that question because I'm a personal student of his. It's hard for me to look at these things objectively. I get a little bit emotionally involved because I witnessed people in various rabbinic establishments either not only setting him aside and ignoring him, but humiliating him, putting him down, trying to keep him as far away as possible from influencing the community. Well, the answer I would give is that Chacham Faur had a vision of a community, of a Sephardic community that was very different from what we think of as Sephardim today. So when we think of Sephardic people today, we have a certain stereotype. What he saw in his tradition, the Sephardic culture and civilization that he was promoting, was so different that it would have caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, lose their influence, lose their position and power. So they were kind of forced, they were put in a situation where they had to fight Chacham Faur or risk having the community become a community. There was no room for them. Certain type of rabbis simply would not exist if Chacham Faur became the most powerful influence in a certain community.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt when you look around and you ask the old timers, not me, I don't mean that to say that in any disparaging way, God forbid. A lot of them have tremendous respect, and even many. I mean, there is overall a tremendous amount of respect and hadacha for someone like Chacham Faur among all the circles that knew about him, and many of them won't admit it openly because of all kinds of fears. The fact that he was outside the box, he was very outside the box kind of person. Someone went against the grain, maybe had a contradictory personality to him also, which made him seem very complex and hard for people to understand. Egos kasher lepitzuach, as they say in Hebrew.
Yeah. Yeah, he was definitely, there was another, I'll give you an example. There was another element, like I was a student, right?
Right.
So the way studying from Hakham Faur was like going into a portal in time. You felt like you're studying with the Geonim. You felt like you're in a different world. And one of the things that made it unique was, at the beginning, if you met him on the street, he was kind and he was humble. He was Tamid Chacham. He was very open to you. But once you came into his inner circle and you're studying Talmud with him, he was merciless. If you didn't read it correctly, or if you didn't prepare and you couldn't read the psukim the right way, he would get angry at you and he would berate you. He was a very tough teacher. And many of the students raised in the United States couldn't handle that kind of toughness. It actually is an old school Sephardic way of teaching as well. So he alienated students of his who came with good intentions. They just couldn't take the humiliation of like this Mr. Miyagi style training that Hakham Faur would dish out. So when I went, I was also shocked.
The Gemara says Zorok Mara b'Talmidim.
Yeah, so he knew how to be Zorek Mara b'Talmidim, but the Talmidim did not know how to be Mekabel Marut also, because they're Americans. So that also added a lot to it. And he wouldn't give up his old school ways of teaching. And that was an element that added to it. And add to the fact that the ideology, the mahalach that he was promoting, insinuated, it laid bare the ignorance of so many rabbis or people who had positions as rabbis in the community, that it kind of put them in a position where they had to fight him back or be revealed for the not such intelligent, not chachamim that they were. When a real Chacham walks into the room and you're not a real Chacham, you right away know it.
I hear. Tell me, on a personal note, what kind of relationship you had with him. When did you get to know him? How you think he had such an impact on you and why?
So that's actually quite interesting. I actually didn't read his work, wasn't exposed to him. I went to yeshiva in Israel. I started in the Mir. A regular, I was a Mir guy. I went to Torah Or of Scheinberg, but from there I was looking for something else. I went to Merkaz Rav Kook, which is a big jump. In Merkaz Rav Kook, I came across Rav Yosef Kafech when he was still alive. I came across some other Maimonideans that had an effect on me, but I wasn't yet fully committed. But as I studied, I got ordained as a rabbi. When I got my smicha, I started having an awakening on my own of ideas that were very similar to Hakham Faur's ideas. So I started on my own, like researching Maimonides, Sephardica, Geonim. I saw that, maybe in academia or in yeshiva, you taught that Maimonides wrote the guide, the Moreh, he was Mechadesh something. I found a link between Maimonides' culture and his approach to halakha and philosophy, and the Geonim, which is a link straight back to the Amoraim. And other people, students of mine, when I was a rabbi, told me, there was a person here once, many years ago, he was run out of the community. His name was Jose Faur, and he used to say things exactly like you're saying. It happened once, it happened twice. I said like old people, like old Syrians would come to me, because I was a youth rabbi in one of the Syrian shuls, and they would come to me, hold me by the hand and say, listen, you have to meet this guy, Hakham Faur. He was one of our last real Chachamim. They would whisper to me and say, listen, you have to meet him. You would like him, he's just right up your alley. So I looked it up, and in fact, when he came to America, we met up, and as soon as I met him, I knew, I said, he's my teacher, and I became his disciple. I gave up being a rabbi. I gave up that whole, I said, I had to unlearn a lot of my yeshiva approach to Talmud, my yeshiva approach to halakha, and I decided to become a student, and I was I can't say full time because I still had to work and make a parnasa, but every summer I would take off and spend as much time as I can studying with Hacham Faur for a few years. Read all his articles, all his books, and that's how we became friends. And then I would also organize sometimes, like me and some of the boys in the Syrian community, we would get together and have like seminars with either Faur or some of his notable students.
And did you find that your exposure to his writings, I'm guessing you read all of his voluminous writings, or most of it?
I think I read all of it, whatever's in English. He has some Spanish. I didn't read the stuff that's in Spanish, but was in English I read.
What about the Hebrew?
Hebrew as well. I read Yisrael Moshe Chazan and Iyunim b'Mishneh Torah. So, yeah.
How do you think his works have influenced you, and how does it rearrange your entire Beltz and Shalom, if I may use that word?
So it completely transformed every single page of Gemara that I open, every word.
Give me a tangible example of something.
I'll give you a principle. I'll give you a principle that you and the listeners will be able to apply to any sugya, and it would make the experience of studying Talmud different. Hacham Faur explains that whenever you have a discussion in the Talmud, an argument, right? It comes from the root of the word emoraim. Emora, what does emora mean in Aramaic? They're men of the word, they're rhetoricians. Okay, what does that mean? An argument between Ravina and Rav Ashi, or Abaye and Rabbah, are not arguments in logic of what the truth of the law is. They're not descriptive of what the mahut of the halacha is. They're prescriptive of what Chazal wanted the law to be. They're generating law at the time. You use one of the 13 midot of Rabbi Ishmael to make your argument, but those midot are not logical arguments. They're just how you're going to phrase your argument. And the decision is based on nimnu v'gamru. It's based on a vote. It's not based on a logical discussion. So you convince the tzibur, the people in the Bet Midrash. It's run like a Bet Din. He treated the whole Talmud as Bet Din Hagadol, and he proves from Maimonides that was the view of Rambam, that was the view of the Geonim. And you don't have to constantly search for logical truth in the Talmud, because the Talmud it's what Chazal wanted it to be, not what the truth of the pasuk really is.
Wow. So some people would call that a radical approach, a radical reinterpretation. I was actually reading your exchange with Rabbi Katz in the Judaism group. It was very interesting, and I hope you will continue.
We have one more round, one more back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this is just the beginning of a much longer thing, especially once hopefully you get your book published, and maybe you want to say something about what this book is coming to is going to come.
Let's first focus on Chacham right now.
Right.
But regarding the Talmudic approach, that was one example that completely changed my view of Talmud. But I can give you like an example in halakha like a halakha example that anyone can understand and can take home with them. There's so many examples. Like, which one am I going to use? Okay, for example, we have a mitzvah in the Torah of chotim chet zecher Amalek, right?
Yes.
So you have to wipe out the remembrance of Amalek. But then the same pasuk says, chotim chet zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach, right? So people ask ethical questions. Are you going to wipe out a whole people? That's the one question. The other question people ask would be, okay, let's say we're wiping out a people. As hard as that sounds, but why would you have to remember a people you wiped out forever? Like if there's a mitzvah, and then there's a technical problem, like in Sefer HaMitzvot, again, everything comes down to the fundamentals. A halacha that's not ledorot does not get counted in one of the 613 mitzvot. It has to be an eternal mitzvah. Like building the Mishkan is not one of the mitzvot, even though it's a commandment, right? So if wiping out Amalek is something that finishes at some point, then that mitzvah just simply doesn't belong in the 613 mitzvot. Why is it there? This is like one of his, one of his questions, and the answer that he gave was very insightful. He said, "Look, Amalek is not a mitzvah to wipe out an entire ethnic group. There is no ethnic group Amalek. You see in the Talmud, they'll attribute the term Amalek to various enemies of Am Yisrael. Amalek is a classification that the Bet Din gives to a certain type of enemy that doesn't have any grievance with us. So let's say you have a group of a nation. We're not fighting over territory. We're not fighting over resources. You're going from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael, and Amalek is not in Eretz Yisrael. They're not in Canaan. They decide to attack you. So that classification of enemy that's mindlessly attacking you just to kill you, the rules of war don't apply to him. You know, that was like one of his like I don't remember in which book he wrote it. I think he mentioned it in the appendices in Horizontal Society. But this is one of his halachic takes, very typical of Faurian halachic take. He also was a proponent of following the Mishneh Torah conceptually, not blindly, not following every halakha in the Mishneh Torah, but the Mishneh Torah is not just laws; it's also concepts. It's also a legal approach. And he always was a proponent of applying Harambam's legal approach, and it would take you always to the best conclusion, like the best practice.
By the way, in what way, if any, was his approach different than Mordechai Kappa?
Yechia and Yosef. There are a few differences. So me being an aficionado of both, you're asking me you came to the right person. So, okay, so the difference would be, first of all, culturally, one is from Sana and the other one is from Damascus, Aleppo. So there's different culture and there are different cultural pressures on these people, different communal needs that they're answering to. But the fundamental difference was that Mordechai Kafir had one concern and one focus, which was the Zohar and mysticism. He considered the Zohar to be idolatry and wanted it stamped out of Judaism. He thought that we needed to cleanse ourselves from that, from the effect of the Zohar. He thought it was Christian ideas that came back into Judaism, and he wouldn't rest until the Zohar was wiped out. That was his goal. Now, in his secondary goal was also following the Rambam and everything, following the Mishneh Torah. He was very meticulous on being like Maimonidean, but people don't know about Yechia is that he also set up an education system, which was ultimately squashed by the Mekubalim, but he set up an education system, a school in Yemen that was going to teach sciences and math and languages. And this was something that he on his own did. And in a country of Yemen, when Arabs were still analphabetic, he had a school that was teaching languages and sciences to the kids in Sana. But unfortunately, it was a separate issue, different discussion. Chacham Faur was not obsessed with the Zohar. In fact, Chacham Faur in private would not disagree with Yechia Kafir's general approach, but he wasn't out for destroying it. He didn't mind that old people in Bet Knesset are reading Chok Yisrael. His Syrian affinity was very strong, and even though he wouldn't be, God forbid, promoting theurgy or any sort of Zoharic influence on halacha or anything like that, but he wasn't really bothered by the Zohar as much as the Dardaim were. And his students, on the other hand, like myself and all the other students, we all hated the Zohar. But he would always try to calm us down and tell us, don't be so obsessed with it. It's not the most important thing, And the truth is that Yosef Kafir, the grandson of Yechia Kafir, was also not obsessed. He also wanted to tone down the anti-Zoharic campaign. So that would be the main difference between the two. Otherwise, there are a lot of similarities. They were both very educated, very humanist. They both were Maimonideans. They will both cause a lot of controversy in their time, much of it not justified. And they were both Geonim Atzumim in Kol Chelkei Torah.
Did he employ any of his writings in his own teaching?
What do you mean?
Chacham Faur employed any of Mordechai Kafir's writings?
Not really. Look, the only thing depends which Mori Kafich we're discussing. If we're talking about Yechia Kafich, there's only one book. If we're talking about Yosef Kafich, what?
Right. Yosef Kafich, yeah.
So Yechia never, not in public. Even though I've asked him questions, I've like showed him Yochamot Hashem and asked him what he thought of things personally, and he would talk about it privately, but never in public. He did employ Mori Yosef's translations of the Moreh all the time, and he was always argue and disagree on finer points of the translation in Arabic. So he'd read the Arabic and say, "Oh, I love Mori Yosef. He's my brother. There's nothing better than him in the world. But over here, I have to say, I can't agree with this particular translation." He told me, by the way, I don't know if anyone knows this, but this he's told me personally, that when Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum was writing V'yoel Moshe, he actually, people don't know, he quotes the guide a lot. He actually quotes the Moreh. And he would call Chacham Faur for questions on the Moreh. So he'd get a phone call from Yoel Teitelbaum asking him, like, translation in Arabic, what something means.
How did they meet? How did that happen?
I'm going to assume that these were people, very talented people. Yeah. And ideologically, me and Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum couldn't be further from each other. But I can read his writings and say there's a man of great talent and great personal integrity. I don't have to demonize my ideological opponents. And people of great talent, great knowledge, and great love of Torah, in living in the same city, how would they not meet? Of course they would meet.
It's mind-blowing. It becomes more colorful as I find out more.
Yeah, can you imagine? He also described to me that he would make a meeting of like Chacham Atlu Babadi and Shaul Lieberman. So like as soon as they met, as soon as they saw each other, they would like start fighting over some sugya in Talmud immediately, and it would go on for hours.
Wow.
And like these two giants would go on for hours discussing something in Talmud and looking up. Like this is what happens to Talmidei Chachamim when they meet.
Nasim oivim ze laze velo zazim ad shenasim ohavim ze laze.
Yeah.
This guy. Yeah, really beautiful. I mean, I had no idea that the Satmar Rebbe quotes first of all the Moreh Nevuchim, and he used to call him for.
I remember finding it surprising when I had my phase and I was going through Satmar literature. It's like this guy really does it. He actually knew the guide. I was surprised because it's like he knew. He quoted it often. He quoted the Igeret Teman where he talks about the three O's. He does a lot of quoting of Maimonides.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll do a different segment on Satmar Rebbe. The Satmar Rebbe is in many ways also out-of-the-box thinker, and in the sense that he utilizes literature that many other rabbinic thinkers abandon or they don't deal with. So
he's a very diverse approach. Yeah.
Very diverse approach. So just to go off on a tangent for a second, Yaakov Dweck, I'm sure you know about, wrote a biography of Rabbi Jacob Sasportas.
Yeah.
The greatest anti-Sabbatean in his time. And he mentions how the tract that he wrote, wherein he attacked the Sabbatean movement, Tzitzat Novel Tzvi, was utilized most famously by Reb Jacob Emden, who considered himself his like successor, both ideologically and otherwise, and then by the Satmar Rebbe in his campaign against secular Zionism.
Against Zionism, yeah.
Yes. So that's
against all Zionism, not just secular Zionism.
Right.
We have to whitewash it.
Absolutely.
Like Zionism could have been religious 100%, and it wouldn't have changed anything.
Yeah. In fact, you might say especially against religious Zionism, because that would be a good parallel to him. That movement would be a good parallel to him for. That in the religion.
By the way, I want to put to rest the question if Chacham Faur was a Zionist or was he an anti-Zionist, was he left-wing, was he right-wing? I'm going to put to rest because I know online there's other fellow students. Look, you see, movements like Faurian Maimonideanism attract radicals, okay? it's going to attract people who are drawn to radical thinking. And within his students, we have people who are very far to the right, and we have people who are very far to the left. Okay, you literally have like just both extremes, and you're gonna have a situation now where both sides are gonna claim that they're the real Chacham Faur. Like that's Chacham Faur was like us. What I'm gonna say. Everybody knows, if people who know me know my political side, is that Hakham Faur always made sure not to insert himself in that argument. And not only did he make sure not to insert himself in that argument, he made his Bet Midrash and his table would be open for people of all political persuasions, because the love of Harambam and the Geonim and the pure Sephardic tradition is more important than anything else. And we shouldn't have let silly arguments over which Arel should be president of the United States to like separate between people who love Torah. That was his real approach.
That's classic, I guess, Faurian, in the sense that when I first came across him a bunch of years ago, when I was reading, this is the first time I discovered him, when I read Joseph Papo wrote a book about Sephardim in America, going all the way back. It was a study on the history of Sephardic Jews in America, and he had a small passage where he discussed him, and he talked about how he studied in Lakewood, and he picked up the lecture, the shiur given by Rebbe Aaron Kotler at the time. He spoke in a rapid Yiddish because he knew German. I mean, I was very impressed with just that. And Rebbe Kotler.
I'm going to confirm that I spoke to Chacham Faur in Yiddish. He speaks fluent Yiddish.
That's amazing. It's just it's mind blowing, and I hope one day someone will gather all these anecdotes and put it together, because I think if anyone deserves a biography, and I think would make for some really good reading and exposure to the man. But here, other than, I think the most important thing is to focus on his legacy, and that is his writings. I mean, his writings on history, which I personally love. And his writings. You
read The Shadow of History? The Shadow of History and the Conversos?
These are all classics. These are all great classics, which just jam-packed with information, and you're drawing from so many different sources and so many different languages. I mean, Ish Eshkolot, a person who had so much knowledge, and I appreciated that aspect very, very much as a lover of Jewish history myself. I was going to get to something specific, which was that luck. Don't remember what I wanted to say. I was going to say something specific, but I can't remember what I wanted to say. Very, very colorful personality. I'm so appreciative that you're giving me these anecdotes that I had no idea about. Any other personal anecdotes you want to share in the meantime?
Yeah, I was once traveling with Chacham Faur. I forget where we were going. I think we were going from Brooklyn to Deal, we were traveling. I'm trying to remember. No, I don't remember the details, but I remember we were traveling together, and I was making small talk. I was asking him questions. We were talking, Chacham. So he says, he told me, be quiet a minute. I'm thinking. Now, I was used to it. I didn't get offended. I was quiet. But it didn't look like he was thinking. He was just sitting silently. 20 minutes later, I again said something. He goes, I'm in Yevamot now. Let's talk later. Like the whole way he was reviewing, he was doing Yevamot. Before that, he was doing whatever Masechet he was doing there. But like he was just I would rather be reviewing Masechet Yevamot in my mind than do small talk with you right now. So that was Hakham Faur. He was also very makpid on health. He ate healthy food. He was never. He exercised regularly. He had exercise regimen, exercise clothes. He took his in that way he was very modern. Like he wouldn't drink caffeine. He used to drink caffeine-free Turkish coffee, like that. And I was zochet to carry his. When he passed away, the things that I remember the most, I can say, is not the classes and not traveling with him. The things that I remember the most is carrying his tefillin to Knis. That to me is the experience that For some reason, that gave me had the most lasting effect on me. And
This
it
is
was
in Israel?
in Israel, yeah. I used to go in the morning sometimes to study with him. You do morning sessions, and Sephardic thing, you carry Chacham's tefillin, like it's something you do for your grandfather,
Syrian?
or you do for your Chacham.
In
What was
Netanya?
that?
In Netanya?
Hmm?
In
In
Netanya?
Netanya, yeah. So I'd go pick him up. I'd pick him up from the house, and we drive to the Knesset, and then we'd walk and carry his tefillin. To me, that was a big deal. Like, because I remember thinking then that in 100 years from now, I'll tell my grandkids, because when Chacham Faur is going to be revealed for who he was and for the effect he had on his work I'll tell them, I carried his tefillin.
Wow.
How many people in the world can say they carried his tefillin? And I was okay to.
You're Nose Kelim.
Kiddies no say kelim, yeah. Yeah. And it's a big responsibility, now that he's passed on. Like when you met him, you thought this was a man who would never go. He was always healthy. He was always sharp. He had a heart attack. He just passed away just suddenly, and all of us students all of his disciples were messaging each other on WhatsApp, and we're thinking to honor his legacy. The next project is we're going to try to get all of his articles together in one book, because it's like over 100 articles.
Yes.
Obviously, the book that I'm writing, Foundations, heavily influenced by his approach, is going to be dedicated to the Chacham. Who else can I dedicate it into my Rav Muvhak? And I'm hoping that more people get exposed to his writings, his approach, and his students.
I was struck by something you said, but something that you mentioned that he said, and that is that some things are not worth getting too worked up on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though you might disagree with your ideological opponent on some finer point, or maybe something that you hold to be a very important tenet, it's maybe don't cast aspersions in your detractor, or don't focus on casting in your detractor. Rather, catch more flies with honey, kind of thing. So, if you don't agree with the, let's say, the Franco-German school on interpretations of Jewish law, for instance, I know that opens a whole Pandora box.
Yeah.
Don't agree, and then explain why you follow a different school. Does that make sense?
It does, but there's a problem, because the way Chacham Faur and us as students see the world, we see the Sephardic tradition that's not Franco-German, that it has been not by anyone's fault, by our fault more than anyone else's, but it's effectively been suppressed and squeezed into this very few corners of the world where it's still alive. So because we feel that way, we're going to be a little more defensive. And the differences between us and the Franco-German school, as you call it, Botenu Tzarfatim, need to be stressed more than otherwise would be. So you'll find Faurians are a little more militant, because we don't have where to send our children. Like my son comes back he goes to religious high school in Israel, Dati Leumi high school, good guys, nothing, no problem. But Talmud, I have to reteach him Talmud and Tanakh from the beginning, because the Gemara that he's learning, like the example I gave you to him, he's really misken he thinks that every argument in the Gemara is a logical argument. So I have to explain to him, no, it's not a logical argument. It's an agenda. It's prescriptive. It's not describing any pristine truth that exists. You can learn Talmud benachat and see that try to understand the legal desires, the reasoning behind each bar plukta, and then you accept the maskanat Talmud for what it is. You don't have to get a migraine over every hava mina.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. But yeah, so you'll find that we'll be a little more militant, but it's part of being a small minority.
Mm-hmm.
It's also part of being part of a group of people that are holding on to, there's the pasuk in Shmuel, Ner Adonai terem yichbeh. We feel that the light of the old Spanish, the noble Spanish Sephardic tradition is flickering away, and it's on its last drops of oil, and we're obsessed with lighting it up again, because if it's gone forever, it's going to be in history books. It's going to be something that historians like you will discuss. There was once a time, but it won't be a living tradition. And we want it to be a living tradition. So sometimes we get our hands a little dirty.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you, as someone who knew him and had discussions with him, did you detect any changes or maybe a softening of the approach as time went on, and maybe changes in thinking and opinion?
No, what changed? Look, I only knew him from the year 2004 until now. 2005, 2004 is when I was introduced to him. But the only changes that I can see is that he wouldn't be saying the things, the provocative things he said when he was younger. He wouldn't say when he was older. But I don't think he changed his mind fundamentally. So maybe he wouldn't write Anti-Maimonidean Demons. I don't think he would write that in his later years.
Right.
But in the 90s, when he wrote it, he meant it, and I don't think he changed his mind fundamentally. He may have retracted a few things from a scholarly perspective, but the main thrust of the idea was not something he disagreed with. Politically, I know he's made some changes, but fundamentally, approach to Sephardic traditions, approach to monotheism, approach to halakha, nothing changed.
Well, if you want to add something about your book, you're more than free to do that.
Yeah, my book is, first of all, I need you to take a look at my book too. I know it's in public, but you should take a look. Tell me what you think. But yeah, my book is almost done. It's called Foundations. It's a modern restatement of the 13 principles of faith of Rambam, and how they're misunderstood, misapplied, and misquoted today. And that's basically the purpose of that book. And it should be out within the next few months. Maybe we'll do another session on the book if you'll be so kind.
Like to do that. Is it self-publishing or you're
I don't know yet. I got approached by different publishers, but I may end up self-publishing. I don't know enough about this yet. I haven't decided yet.
Well, I hope that happens really soon. Certainly looking forward to having you on after we mercilessly review this book. I'm kidding.
Yes.
It looks great. I perused it. It looks really, really great. I'm really looking forward to having you on and discussing your book more in depth. And maybe even having on someone on the other side.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
excellent. Thanks for having me on. It was good to see you again.
Thank you so much for coming on. We hope to have you on again soon. And may the Neshama have an aliyah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Challengers History.